Good morning, everyone. We are very excited to have a person whose experience would be enough to fill 3 or 4 people's work experiences because Umid Akhmedov, he is not only an entrepreneur, founder of a startup, but he also works as a non-executive director on the board of a big bank, but he also served as a commercial chief technology officer, CTO in a large company. And he has also so much breadth and richness of his experience that hopefully he's going to share with us today. Umit, welcome to our studio.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Now I need to
And
live up
Umid,
to the expectations. Thank you.
definitely. Umid, obviously, with the vastness of your experience, it's even hard to see where to start with asking a question. So many questions we both have for you of your expertise. So, is there anything that the listeners would want to know about you, or you would want for them to know about you?
I think during the course of the conversation, we will explore several avenues, different questions, and I think that would be sufficient. I mean, the introduction already has been too big, so I would say nothing to add.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure there is more of Umid than just the professional experience. What defines you? Like, if you were to introduce yourself somewhere in the wilderness where titles and work experiences don't matter,
Hmm.
how would you introduce yourself?
I would introduce myself as a person, as a human, as someone who actually cares about the environment, cares about people around me, and someone who actually thinks that doing something needs to be bringing value to the rest of the world.
What is a current inspiration? What is your current project or drive? What's going on in your life right now?
So right now, I'm primarily working with a startup that we have started 2 years ago, and that startup is there to help online retailers to increase sales by leveraging on independent drivers and existing parcel shop network. And the parcel shop network is basically the any kind of corner shop that you can use as a pickup or drop off point. And in reality, what we are trying to do with that is basically to reduce costs for receivers and for sellers so that we can democratize e-commerce and make sure that it's convenient, especially in the region, Central Asia and Caucasus, because in that region, 40% of online orders are basically not delivered or don't find their receivers because uh, there are no the existing solutions don't solve that problem, right? And and this is like very important because it's for that region especially, it's $4 billion in lost revenue opportunities for retailers. Basically, bad quality delivery is the number one reason why brands lose customers. So we're basically trying to solve that problem technologically using our AI platform that we have built. And that AI platform is basically coordinating between drivers, decentralizes distribution, coordinates between drivers, receivers, and parcel shops. So basically, we are helping clients to get scalable, faster, and cheaper deliveries.
Yeah. And, we are all familiar about startups from, watching movies or knowing someone. We all know it's a dynamic environment. You create something from scratch. You
Yeah.
dare to do things that other people may not probably even think about. Compared to your previous experience working in a large corporate, how would you describe your current setup as a leader of that startup? What are the big differences that you had to adjust in your current role?
Right. That's a big one, Khurshid. I think so. Well, C-level positions and board experience don't really make the startup leadership rigid. They make it more intentional. So you really start to move faster because you have learned where not to spend your time your ego or money. So at the first glance, they look different. So C-level roles, board work, and startup leadership, they look different, but the core skill is still the same. It transfers very well. And basically, as a C-level executive, you basically learn to make decisions with incomplete information and take full ownership of the outcomes. That's kind of daily life in startup. So it's like very transferable knowledge. And you also learn to revisit your own assumptions, which, I would refer here to the book called Think Again, a book by Adam Grant. And basically, the ability to rethink, to unlearn, and to update beliefs, that's as soon as the reality changes. And the reality changes all the time. So this kind of helps. And board experience actually teaches you to kind of think in like systems and focus on long-term value and maybe ask uncomfortable questions early. And that mindset kind of prevents many classical startup mistakes. So you try to optimize early. You're not confusing the activity with progress. And what changes, the only difference is basically the scale, not the leadership fundamentals. It's more like everything simply becomes more direct, faster, and maybe more personal.
So it seems that what you've done, and this is a bit unexpected to be honest, it's not just you had to reinvent yourself or change who you are or the approaches that you've been using before, but you adapted those skill sets to a new environment. So you took them and you're still using those skill sets, right? But in a more fast-paced, dynamic environment.
True.
But is there?
You can also say, sorry for interrupting, but you can also say that you became more intentional because when you are in a big company, you have a lot of constraints that are not dependent on you. Here you have full like freedom to do things by the book.
And I would say more responsibility, I guess. It's not just
Absolutely.
freedom to make decisions, but you are responsible for those decisions.
Absolutely. In the corp, you also take responsibility for the outcome with the limited information. But here, you are more intentional because you take the ownership of the outcome, and it's at a bigger scale because the whole company is at stake.
And it seems like you have a little bit more control over the outcome too, because you are much closer connected to all the moving parts than you are if you are in corp. I have a follow-up question. I'm curious myself. I'm sure the listeners might be too. Obviously, you had the whole career that you built in corporate world. And then you decided to, for some people who might seem absolutely crazy, just jump and go into startup. So what was driving you to make that decision?
I guess too much inefficiency in the corp, mismatch between what's being said and what's being done, too much trust into nice and beautiful presentations and no follow-up, and saying that we don't need silos but still allowing for them, and a lot of mismatch between what's being said and what's being done. I think that kind of build up in me, where I said I want to build a company that would have a culture and that would have, it will actually be the company where I want to work, and not only myself, but also people who are working there are willing to work there, not because it's paying well, because it's nice to be there.
How are you finding your feelings now? You had the idea, you wanted to make that change and approach things completely differently. And I'm sure loads of people can relate to everything you just said and how you described, the work in corporate world. How do you finding it now after 2 years experience in startup? Did you achieve what you wanted to, or do you feel that there's still room to improve?
There is always room to improve. We're building a company that is built on very strong values, where we encourage entrepreneurship, where we run after the ball and not after the people, where we basically try to say things as they are, and not hide it in the beautiful numbers or presentations. And always, always, always ask the question, why and how are we helping the client? Or how are we creating the value? How are we adding the value? Will it add the value or not? If not, then we drop. So basically, very pragmatic approach, but at the same time, everyone has a voice, right? So it's, I mean, well, as a result, right, within the 2 years, we have people coming back to our startup to continue work with us from the places where they were getting more money. So I think this is one of the results that I can share without saying that we are there yet.
And it's very interesting that for 2 years for any startup is a big is a very long time. You know, some startups they die in the first year. Many of them they do, and you managed to survive. What are the challenges that you faced in the first year that you learned from, if you don't mind sharing? Because the thing is, what I'm thinking is there are many people who are also disappointed with the corporate environment, yet they either don't have courage or an opportunity or some other constraints that don't allow them to kind of change their cozy, comfortable position.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not all rosy there, right? There are challenges that you're facing. So for those listeners who want to have a very clear picture and have make an informed decision based both on advantages and disadvantages of running a startup, could you tell us more about the dark side? Maybe, I don't know, the challenges that you had to face in the first year.
Well, many challenges. So let me try to first I want to emphasize that basically the startup phase is not short. I mean, it's 2 years is not short, but it's even longer than 2 years actually for a normal startup. I'm not talking about like, startups that were built in 2000s that got like, billions within a couple of weeks. No, I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about the normal guys like ourselves. So there is a long road basically before becoming a public company. And in that area, you are still a startup. And if you strip away the like strategy, the team, the product, basically you need kind of resilience with clarity. So not blind optimism, but the ability to kind of stay calm. You need to be able to decide and keep moving when outcomes are uncertain. So the first year showed that you basically need to really believe in this in what you're building, in your vision, so that people will join to help you, and not only help you like by hands, but also people that would come and help you with money, because it's a venture, right? I mean, no one has like people when you are explaining it to people who has never seen it working, and they see others, bigger guys or bigger companies, they would not believe you. They would say, let me just go somewhere else, right? So this is one of the most difficult things. And well, personally, I had to become kind of someone who could like hold the pressure without passing it on. So someone who could like separate the signal from the emotion and let go of the validation from investors, from customers, or even the team. Because like if a team is walking away from you, or an investor says your idea is lame, or a customer says I would buy it from someone else, you basically are kind of, you accept it as a critic, like in the normal case, right? But in reality, I had to learn that it's a mismatch between what I offer and what the problem is. And instead, like concentrating on that and trying to figure out what is it that would actually solve the problem. And what is the problem actually, right? Of course, first, what is the problem? And then what is it that I need to do? And then once I figured that, then the conversation changed, right? So, and I think I remembered by that time I was reading the book called The Attributes by Rich Divining. And well, it also kind of emphasized some of the attributes that a person could have for the startup, and that would be like resilience and adaptability, emotional regulation. And because the leadership skills that you need there is all trainable. It's not necessarily something you are born with. So surviving that kind of startup phase isn't about becoming more aggressive or visionary. It's becoming more pragmatic and doing what genuinely benefits the client, like stopping what doesn't create value and becoming like steadier and more accountable when no one else can. And yeah, and then you can ask, so is like is it for everyone or not? And I like, because you mentioned like there are many people who feel like that, but they are not jumping into startup. It's all about like, I wouldn't say that like working in a startup is not suitable. I would say, yeah, well, it depends, right? It's perfectly okay that someone is not necessarily willing to go startup way, because startups, they operate in this constant uncertainty, and there are people who want certainty, right? So in that sense, it depends. So because basically the roles are changing and priorities shift, and success, well, basically success will come later after you have executed based on the decisions, and it's not always fit for everyone, right? So some people thrive in that kind of environment, and the others, they like structure, they like stability and like clear boundaries. So in that sense, I mean, I like to, you probably have already, I like to kind of refer to the books because I like to read. And so I was very inspired in this sense by the book called The Mindset by Carol Dweck. And here it's really where the growth mindset comes into work. Right. So startups, they disproportionately reward growth mindset. So you need to have comfort with learning. You need to have comfort with mistakes and adaptation, and being always like, trying to figure out how do I solve the problem, and rather than like fixed mindset where you basically say, I'm the CEO, so I need to be I give orders and everyone executes kind of thing. Or, a linear progression is what I need. So this is like the border, I would say. And so I would say that the kind of least sexy of that emotional operational grind is basically you need to be repeating the same conversation with customers and investors. You need to be doing the work below your title. I was, at some point I was finding myself, doing the Instagram posts at the same time, making design of the handout materials for the investor meeting. And at the same time, preparing the room by actually taking the mop and cleaning the room before the investors will come into the office, because the cleaner was not. So the meeting was like very quick. We're coming. Okay, yeah, sure. What do I do right now? So it's like, unforeseeable, uncertain, and it's basically progress not always even, and it's not always visible. So, and there is no, like, one of the important things is like no one knows you. So there is no big brand behind your shoulders, and basically accountability is very, very, very direct. So startups don't offer comfort. Just that's what you need to know. But they offer the acceleration, the learning. The learning is like with a big L, and the responsibility with a big R. So for the right people, the trade-off is basically very energizing. And for others, it's simply the wrong environment. So both choices are valid, I would say.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much for sharing.
Yeah, clearly you're thriving in that environment of uncertainty. Like there's a saying, become comfortable in the uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
I think this is definitely about startups and about your experience, it seems.
And it's good to have, for people, for our listeners, to make an informed decision, because it's not all about glamour and about, big money, big payout, or being famous, right? I don't have statistics, but I would imagine that the success ratio is not that high. Some startups probably will never succeed, will never make it to.
I can tell you.
Yeah.
the statistics. The statistics is that
Please.
startups fail, like 70% of startups fail the first 2 years, and then the remaining 90% fails in the next 2 years. And then, like, so if you kind of live there for 4 years and still there, then the chances are that you will
You
continue is good.
Yeah.
So we're in the middle right now.
So
Umid, I
time
have a
also.
question. I
Sure.
have a question tied to that. You mentioned that you had to, when in the beginning, especially, I'm sure still now, you had to face quite a lot of rejection. Tying into what Khurshid has said about, demystifying things. How many, roughly, I'm sure you don't remember specifics, but roughly, how many times do you feel that you have been rejected? Your idea, your concept has been rejected by the investors before you got the yes?
I never counted, but it feels like more no's than yes.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say percentage-wise, you would get 70% of rejection, and then 30% would actually be covering for all the no's. It will give you the courage to continue. Actually, that's yeah, without counting. I mean, I'm just trying to kind of make a rough
Yeah.
estimate.
No, definitely, it's not for everyone, right? I mean, to feel rejected is a very
Tell
painful
me,
experience. Yeah, I would, and from your reaction, I may see that it's not you don't get used to being rejected. Still, I mean, it still hurts, probably a bit less, but still hurts. So it's not for everyone. But okay, let's say startups are not for everyone. That's
hmm
fine.
hmm
But surely there are certain skills that people can take from you or from people like yourself and use it in their corporate world. If you could give, advice, what kind of skill set are useful, not only in the startup environment, but those that you learned in the startup environment, but they are useful in the corporate environment. What would those skills, useful skills be?
The biggest skill one can take from startups to the large corps is basically the speed of learning. Like, the speed at which you really need to adapt and learn from the market is insane. So startups basically force you to make like decisions with incomplete data. You really need to test your assumptions very quickly and adjust without waiting for permission. And large companies increasingly need that. I think need that kind of muscle. Also, one of the things is basically the feeling for the market, like feeling for the customer needs, because it would bring much, like when you are in startup, you bring stronger customer first feeling or reflex with yourself. And in a startup, you're like, because you're constantly exposed to that kind of real customer pain, and which basically kind of sharpens the prioritization and I would say prevents internal optimization from replacing the value creation. So here I remember about that book called The Sense and Respond, where you kind of, really need to reflect the sense, learn, adapt kind of loop. And this is what you really experience in the startup, which probably also one of the reasons why corporations get very slow, because they say they adapt that, but not necessarily do that, right? And also the startups basically teach you the resource discipline. Every hire, every feature, every initiative needs to have a real cost, and you have to be very intentional. So basically, you need to be knowing what actually moves the outcomes. And that kind of skill is very much transferable to the corporate world. So basically, to conclude, you can actually take from startups, you can take the how to learn faster, how to decide earlier, and how to stay closer to reality. And when I say reality, I mean the customer.
And those corporates, they were startup in the beginning of their life cycle, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
probably have it in their, and that's why they're successful, because they have those things in their DNA, but maybe they're so hidden by
Mm-hmm.
the structures built later that it's probably, the metaphor I'm thinking is about just remembering the origins, right?
True.
And
Yes, yes.
any good corporation probably would have those origins. But how can they do that? I still don't know the answer, to be honest, because, okay, so many years have passed since this early stages, and the company is big, but how can they relearn the things that brought success in the first place? And it's an open question. I don't know.
And
Maybe
I
there
think
is no answer.
it's back to that mindset and back to this like growth mindset where you also need to have the right thinking. So in that book that I mentioned in the beginning with Adam Grant, Think Again, you have 4 types of thinking. And in one, you are a politician, where you listen to the room and basically tell the consensus decision. You are a prosecutor, where you say you're wrong. And then you're a preacher, where you say I'm right. And then you have the scientific thinking, where you basically say, what if I'm wrong? And this is basically very, very fundamental for corporations, where they really need to get back to their origins and say, what is it that we are doing wrong? And are we true to our origins? Are we true to our why? So in that other podcast that we have discussed, where we are trying to do it for the Uzbek market, we basically analyze these companies, and the companies that have been going through that and all growing, and then at some point going down to the almost to bankruptcy. And then when we analyze the companies, we can see that what they do at that point to get back on track is to get very focused approach to what is it that we're solving and why are we here at all. So look at the example with Lego, right? The way they have got back on track was by simplifying. They cut maybe 50, maybe 60% of their product line. They actually said, we are creating the worlds for players, not the bricks. The bricks is nothing. It's the world that we're creating. And then it was very focused approach on how to achieve that. Same with take let's say Adidas, right? They have also been everywhere and trying to do everything and trying to follow every trend that is there, until they decided, no, we're doing only the things that we were built for. Let's go after the customers that we have been serving. Let's find our connection back to them, right?
Yeah. And that
So,
reminds me, with our other guests, where we were talking, that one of the themes was taking a pause. I mean, with the companies that you mentioned, Adidas and Lego and some other companies, they had to do that because they were at such a stage where either adapt or die, right? And then they went to basics and to the core values that they had. But the companies don't have to go to that extreme case to reinvent themselves. And I'm pretty sure, and that's why one of the themes was, how can leaders take a pause in a noisy environment and then think about those strategic things? And it seems that it's a necessity nowadays, and every any time of the history, and it's the necessity to take this pause. And hence this, we have this podcast, which is Beyond the Noise, which allows leaders to take a pause and think about the strategic things, pay attention to things that do matter.
So I agree with that, but I also think that they do it. They take a pause. They look at the strategic things. They look at strategies. Every company has a strategy for next year, for next 3 years, for next 5 years. And they go into the boardrooms. They meet regularly. They discuss things. They agree on things. They rate each other and say, "Oh, I believe in your plan," etc. But they still get into that kind of rabbit hole of nice presentations and nice.
From my own experience on the boards, this pause is actually not a pause, because what many of us tend to do, okay, we had good year last year. How can we make it better this year? But what you have been describing is how to say no to things
Yes.
that kind of work, but it's a big courage, at least, to just cut certain things that are, maybe bringing some profits, but they do not align with the core values, core mission of the company. And that's what kind of pause I'm talking about. This is actually a deep pause where you revisit not only last year results, but you go back. What is the core value of the company, and what are the strategic directions we need to look and reassess?
And the point I'm trying to kind of make here is basically that you do that by, like, so the sharper is your metrics, the easier it is to say yes or no to something. And my point is that the corporations, they need to get back to their why through measuring the right thing. Something that we learn in startups, but not necessarily have that in the corporations, is this customer acquisition cost to the lifetime value of the customer. This is very small, maybe, very invisible thing, but at the same time, it can change a lot. So if you are spending more money to acquire customers and they will stay with you, you are doing something fundamentally wrong. And there is not a pause. You really need to reconsider the whole thing. Many companies, many corporations, you can see, I mean, this is just one example of how to calculate. There are many other metrics, but it's not always just revenue. It's not always just profit. It's not always return on investment. Like, your return on investment is like something that will always be growing if you do the fundamentals right. And I think this is the answer to your question about, at least in my opinion, maybe there are other opinions, but so what do they really need to be doing? Yes, they need to say yes to some things, no to some things, be very focused about what their core is, but also measure it right, because you cannot change something without measuring it right, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's very true. And I think that because of the structures that the corporations have and everything that they have to deliver to the shareholders, I think the metrics that you have mentioned, it's almost like most of them are irrelevant. They just metrics for metrics' sake,
Yeah,
just to
true.
fill in the presentation and show something going up.
Yeah, something going up.
Actually, in that noise, you're losing the core. Why are we at this meeting? How are we doing this? What are we actually looking at? And most people, if they're really honest, they will say, I do not know. I do not know what I'm looking at right now.
True.
Everybody's happy, so I guess it's good.
That's true. Yeah. Yes.
So I had a thought about that. Probably it's very useful for CEOs of large companies to get back to the startup environment once in a while, kind of to refresh, to recharge, I guess. If you were to go
Like a
back now.
startup boot camp.
Yes, exactly. Because there are so many benefits, even like self-development, intellectual, emotional development that Umid was mentioning. If you were to go back to a large corporate, I'm not saying, I don't think you would probably go back now, but if you were to go back to a large corporate, what would you do differently?
That's a good one. I think there is a long way before I go back to corporate. I don't think I will go there yet. But if I go, then I will have very honest discussion with the CEO of that company or the board. And I would actually very meticulously ask about those three things. Like, what's our why? How do we connect? How do we understand the market? Like, how do we connect to our clients or customers? And yeah, what is it that is not working? And if I don't get that kind of answer from the CEO, then I think it's very difficult to help the company. Or if I don't get that from the board, because if there is no admittance of something that we are doing wrong, then there is a fundamental problem, I think. It's this growth mindset that I would be looking for and asking for. So again, it's the learning. How do we ensure the learning? How do we ensure the basically communication with the client so that we know we can feel it, right? And yeah, how can we decide faster? How can we make sure that our decisions are not lost in politics?
That often happens. As you were saying that, an example came to mind about the what works. Like you said, what works and what doesn't. And I'm sure a bit controversial, and maybe you can also give your own opinion on that. The example of Twitter, which is now X, and when they said they would come in and Elon Musk would actually ask, what do you do for a job? What do you do here? And some people couldn't even tell him what.
Mhm.
And he said, unfortunately, we'll have to let you go. And that's another example to me of things are not working. If you have a structure that doesn't even understand itself, that's not working. That means it's a waste. And that's when optimization can come in. And I'm sure lots of corporations could. I know lots of criticisms came from that example, but I definitely know from the past experience, there's lots of places that could actually do with the exercise like that, and it would do them good.
Yeah. But, in this case, it's not a straightforward issue because if people don't know what they're doing, is it really their fault? Some people would say yes. I mean, they need to kind of dig deeper and have more meaningful understanding, right? But another thing is, what is the corporate culture? What kind of job the leaders are doing in making sure that the message goes through every level. And I don't have much optimism, to be honest, even when Umid was saying, if he were to go back, but I didn't sense too much optimism that actually that would work, that people would listen. Maybe I was wrong, but it's just, yeah,
So
it's
I
not.
think I agree with you about, so it's not always people's fault. I mean, those guys who are actually moving the needle. It's always the leadership fault, in my opinion, because the leadership, as you mentioned, could not communicate the value that we are building, that value that we are bringing. And it needs to go through the whole chain of command, but it's not happening. So you probably know that book, Trust and Inspire, where basically the two kind of ideas are being held up upon each other. Like one is called Trust and Inspire, where you basically inspire by actually helping people to make their own decisions, and you create a culture where it works based on people's own judgment. And then there is a command and control that is being against that, right? And the command and control is oftentimes still a case in corporations, while being said, oh, we're trying to create a culture where we trust and inspire. It's not necessarily it. It's not necessarily happening. So I would say that, so I had an experience with one of the companies where uh, there was a conflict between the employees and the strategy that has been set by the company. And the problem was that it was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. So when the management comes and says, we want to do X or Y or Z, this creates all of a sudden so many questions. And the employees got very not necessarily get excited, because they say, well, what does that mean for me? What am I going to do with that? Will my work change? Will my position change? Will my salary change? What will it mean for me? How do I bring my presents home for Christmas? Very simple, very humanistic needs. This is normal.
Those are valid concerns. Yeah, those are
Yeah,
valid
Absolutely.
concerns.
but at the same time, if the company knows that they are going to make changes and don't prepare the company for that change, this is basically creating a lot of tension and a lot of stress for people. And that's why they start to leave. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's all right to not to be sure about something. It's all right to not to know that this will bring this kind of results. But at the same time, being open about it, being vocal about it, and actually saying that, hey, I have a plan and I think it will work. But let's work together about it. Let's figure out, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm wrong. Show me, help me. This kind of addressing the uncertainty in that way and actually preparing the organization for the change would help a lot of companies, a lot of corporations to, to become different, to make this transformation from being the classical command and control to becoming the real trust and inspire company that has values and they know what they are doing. So I have read that book. It was called The Energy Raising by Julia D. Ganji. I think I'm pronouncing it correct. I read the book. I didn't train to name the author. So, well, the explanation goes on how pressure comes basically less from effort and more from operating in the unknown. So basically, like a lot of these corporate structures, they don't allow for fast or human-centered adjustment, especially in HR. So in a startup, I can practice this directly and I can see the results. I mentioned that people are returning to us, sometime after, even for a lower salary, because we clarify, because there is safety in the unknown, being in the unknown. And that trust really matters. So what I understand now is basically like people don't necessarily struggle with the capability. They struggle with the pressure. They struggle with uncertainty. So helping people to demystify that uncertainty, helping people to simplify that concern, not necessarily remove it, but at least simplify it and say, yeah, well, we are in this reality. That kind of helps you. So basically it's about this containment, right? Absorbing the uncertainty so others can also function, right? So I think it's clarity that comes first and then the execution. And when I was at Microsoft, there was this kind of, mantra that people would, like, my managers would tell me, create clarity, remove obstacles. Create clarity, remove obstacles. This is your job. Indeed. This is like, if an employee is not able to meet their targets or are not successful, then I'm not successful. So it
Exactly.
was directly my responsibility to make sure that, it's clear what needs to be done and obstacles are removed. So, and I think it scales to the corporations in that sense.
But I think it has to come up, what you described, it has to be initiated from up down, right? It has
Yes.
to be at the highest level initiated in that way for it to work, trickle down. As we see a lot of the time, the leadership at the top does determine the tone across the board. There are some outliers. There are some people that stand out and do things differently because they have different experience or they have different beliefs. Oftentimes, these people are being pushed out over time because they don't fit the majority narrative.
Hmm.
And before we conclude our conversation today, is there any advice you would give to leaders of larger companies that would make their life and the life of their employees and the life of the companies better?
Well, I think realizing that leadership is not about being smartest in the room, but about helping others to be at their best and bringing their best thinking. That would actually be one advice.
This is beautiful.
That's a great advice. Yeah.
And Umid, before we conclude, we have this tradition to ask 4 or 5 questions at the end, very short questions and short answers, preferably. If you don't mind, we will jump right into those questions.
I
Khurshid, you
don't
can
mind,
take
but
Khurshid, you can take over because it will
yeah.
be quicker. You can take over the questions this time.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Let's go ahead. The first question is, what's one habit people in senior roles should drop immediately?
Assuming that what made them successful in the past would automatically carry them into the future.
What's a practice you wish you started much earlier in your career?
I think treating thinking as something to practice and refine, not something I could just rely on. So thinking as a discipline rather than an innate ability.
What's the hardest part of being responsible for people that no one really talks about?
Changing culture. This is the hardest. Like helping people when they realize how uncomfortable and difficult that change can be.
What's a mistake you see experienced professionals repeat again and again?
I think letting success that they have achieved quietly replacing their curiosity. So when experience should actually make you more open, not more fixed.
And the last one. What's one piece of advice that only made sense to you later in your career?
Yeah, I think this is advice to myself as well, right? That leadership isn't about making you smartest in the room, but actually bringing the best in other people.
Excellent. Umid, thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you.
us, sharing your experience. And it's, what makes this conversation useful is that you have a perspective from different parts of the professional life, from big companies, from boardroom, from startups, from entrepreneurship. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We really enjoyed having a conversation with you.
Absolutely. We enjoyed it and we wish you to continue on your endeavors with most success as you have for the last 2 years. And I'm hoping that we'll speak to you again and maybe we'll speak to you in another 2 years where you will tell us how you have survived those 4 years.
Okay, thanks a lot for inviting and thanks a lot for having me. I wish Beyond the Noise to become very successful and known and yeah, so that like you get 1 million listeners in the next 1 week.
Thank you, Umid.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. We appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thank you.